Last section of the chapter is about quadratic inequalities and solving them. This lesson is going to extend your experiences with algebra quite a bit, but that is actually a good thing because of where you're going to be going. Today we're going to be exposed to higher levels of analysis as well as 2 new methods of presenting higher level answers. So before we get to the lesson of actually solving them, let's just go ahead and look at the higher level presentations that we need to work on. First off, in higher level math, you face classes where there are no more open or closed circles. You'll be exposed instead to what we call, or what you know to be parentheses and brackets. Those 2 notations will replace open versus closed, and it is important that you learn to connect parentheses with the open circle and brackets with the closed circle. So I would write that down for yourself because that is key if you're going to understand what's going on. But again, your experience is going to help you, which is why I'm not even going to get into it because we are going to be using these later. But again, parentheses is your open circle, brackets will be your closed circle. Second thing, which I will get into quickly, is interval notation. And interval notation replaces your typical expression of final answers algebraically. So let's just look at some examples of how it changes. Make sure you copy these notes because it is a very short example of what we do, but it covers everything you will need for your homework as well as for any future problems that you'll see. Before, you would put the answers of x is less than 6. This is not interval notation. Interval notation is different and it takes a little bit more thought. What you have to realize is that if x is less than 6, numbers that work are 6, not 6, but 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, all the way back to the smallest number you can think of. And so your interval notation will be everything from negative infinity. Remember, parentheses means do not include it because negative infinity is not a number. You do not use a bracket. You would only use a bracket if you actually had a number to start with, but negative infinity is not a number. So we will start from negative infinity and go all the way up to 6. Now, 6 is not included. That would be an open circle, and remember that an open circle is another parentheses. And so that is your interval notation. It's saying that all the numbers from negative infinity, not included, up to 6, not included, are solutions. So that is your interval notation on how you will translate it. But again, it starts from recognizing that the numbers you're looking for are smaller than 6, so you're going to include negative infinity all the way up to 6. Another one, x is greater than or equal to 4. In this situation, we start at 4, so 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way up to the biggest number possible. So we are starting at 4 and going to infinity. Positive infinity, but you don't need the plus. The key thing here is that since 4 is included, we use a bracket, because remember brackets are closed circle, and because infinity is not an actual number, that we will always use a parentheses. So that's 2 things you need to know in terms of interval notation. Third thing, which is actually not so bad, if x is between negative 9 and 14, your numbers are going to be 9 and 14. The question is, what do I use to indicate the outside parts? Because that would be an open circle on negative 9, we will put a parentheses on negative 9. Because that would be a closed circle on 14, we will use a bracket on 14. And again, this is telling me everything from negative 9 to 14 without including the negative 9 is our solution, which is what this is telling us. And then the last one requires a symbol that you might not have seen, maybe you did, but we'll talk about it now. Because this would be 2 separate parentheses. X is less than or equal to 2, so we are going to go from negative infinity to 2 included. But we need a second one, so we will use the U, which means union, which means put this together with whatever I have here, which is going to go from 10 to infinity. Why did I use an open parentheses? Because that would be an open circle. You always use a parentheses on the infinity stuff. So there you go. That is your interval notation, the 4 situations you will see. Again, hopefully you have those 4 things written. Hopefully you are logisticizing where everything is coming from. Again, use parentheses with infinity. Use parentheses if it's open. Use brackets if it's closed. Use a union if there's 2 different sections, and you should be good. Again, you won't encounter a lot of interval notation, but it was a good moment to show you what it was with what it was all about. Just be sure to use your notes to assist you with the notation whenever you actually need it. I think you need it on like 1 question today on your homework, so that's it. Alright, so let's go ahead and get to the problems that we're actually here for. It actually includes 4 steps that I can break it down to. First off, you want to solve the inequality as if it was an equality. Secondly, set up labels on a graph, that way you can visually see what you need. Then you're going to test some key points to see what's true and false, and then you're going to answer in the proper format. That might be interval notation, it might be the notation we've used before, which it is like that a lot, or it might even be a graph. But again, the key thing is just be able to translate whatever you know into the proper format. The good news is all these questions are multiple choice, and so as long as you can set them up, you should be okay. So don't make it cheaper by not really taking good notes, but I'm just telling you that everything is multiple choice. So as long as you can set it up and get to where you need to be, I think you should be able to answer it. So here we go. Step 1 on this, if you want to solve this, is to solve it like you can. And so the first thing I want to do is try to solve by factoring to see if I can find numbers that multiply to make 24 and add to be negative 10. I believe those numbers are 6 and 4. And since it's negative 10 and making a positive 24, it'll be a negative 4 and a negative 6. Again, I hope you're with me on that. If not, you want to make sure you practice, I think that's 4.3. But again, negative 4, negative 6 works because negative 4 plus negative 6 makes negative 10. Negative 4 times negative 6 makes 24. It means I can factor this to be x minus 4, x minus 6, less than or equal to 0. That's still not solved because I now have to do x minus 4 equals 0, which means x is 4, and I have to do x minus 6 equals 0, which means that x is 6. So that's my solutions that I have. And the second part said to make a number line. So just make a cheap sketch of a number line with the numbers in order, of course, because they have to be in order. And then what we're going to do now is test regions. We need to test a section over here, a section here, and a section there to see where the actual solutions are to be true. So over here, typically if wherever zeros is, I'm going to use 0. So numbers smaller than 4 would be 0, and watch my analysis here because it's important. If I were to take this and put a 0 in here, then I would end up with 0 minus 4, which is negative, 0 minus 6, which is negative, and that would be less than or equal to 0. Is a negative times a negative going to be less than or equal to 0? Not that I know of, because a negative times a negative is a positive, and a positive will never be less than or equal to 0, which is false. So that can't be your answer. Check a value here, which would be 5. If I was to test 5, I would end up with a 5 minus 4, which would be a positive number, 5 minus 6, which would be a negative number, less than or equal to 0. Positive times a negative is a negative, going to be less than or equal to 0. That would be true. So we know that part works. And then the last thing I would test is something over here. Let's just check 10, because as long as it's something over here, it works. 10 minus 4 is positive. 10 minus 6 is positive. Positive times positive is positive. Would a positive ever be less than 0? No, it would not. So we know for a fact that this has to be the middle section between 4 and 6. So for your graph, what you would have is, because this is a closed circle, is a bracket, and a bracket with the shading in between. And you would also have to put, because it's between 4 and 6, 4 less than or equal to x less than or equal to 6. Now if that was interval notation, I'll just do all three. You would put, because 4 and 6 are both included, 4 to 6, close it. So that would be your general notation, that would be your interval notation, and that would be the graph, not using open closed circles, but the brackets and the parentheses, because again it is going to include whatever answers are there. Whew. B. Same thing, I want to solve this. So the first thing I want to try to do is find numbers that multiply to be negative 120 and add to be 7. Let's use our calculator and see. Typically whenever it makes a negative, it means the numbers are going to subtract. So I'm looking for numbers that are 7 apart that make 120. So 120 divided, I'm just going to start with 10, which is way too close. 120 divided by 8. Look at that. 8 and 15 are 7 apart. So I'm pretty sure those are the numbers we are looking for, but I want to check those. It should be a positive 15 because I want a positive 7, and because it's a negative 120, that should be it. These two do add to make 7. They also should multiply to make negative 120, which we see that they do, so those are my numbers. But because there's a number attached, I have to do it what we call the long way, which is to split and group. Only thing I can take out of this is x. Copy the sign. I can take a 5 out of this, which would be 3x minus 8. I then can factor 3x minus 8 and x plus 5 less than or equal to 0. I then have to solve. Adding 8 would make it positive. Dividing by 3 makes it 8 over 3. And gives me a negative 5. So looking at my graph, I am looking again. You want to make sure these are in order. Luckily that's negative, that's positive, so that has to be your negative 5. This has to be my 8 over 3. Again, I need to test these things, so what I want to do is take this part here and test it. So I will take a number like negative 10, because that's negative 5. And so in my mind here, again, analysis, 3 times negative 10 is negative 30. Negative 30 minus 8 is definitely going to be a negative. Negative 10 plus 5 is definitely going to be negative. And then its symbol says less than or equal to 0. Is a negative times a negative ever going to be less than or equal to 0? No, it's not. That is false. Typically what that means is that it's going to be the middle section, because they usually alternate. If that was true, you could almost assume that it's this section and that section, but again, you don't ever want to assume too much, because you never know what's going to happen. In between a negative and a positive is always a 0 that I'm looking for. That would be 3 times 0 minus 8, which obviously is going to be negative. 0 plus 5 is going to be positive. Negative times positive is negative, and if you look at that, a negative is going to be smaller than 0, which is true. 8 over 3 I need to kind of approximate. 3 goes into 8 2 times, so it's about 2, so I'm going to pick a number like 5, something that's way away from that. 3 times 5 is 15. 15 minus 8 would be positive. 5 plus 5 is 10, which is also positive. Would a positive times a positive be less than or equal to 0? The answer to that is no. So again, we are in the middle, which means that graph-wise, because we are including this, it should be a bracket and a bracket shaded in the middle. Standard notation would be, because we're between these numbers, negative 5 less than or, copy that sign, less than or equal to x less than or equal to 8 over 3. Interval notation, because I'm in between, that would be bracket negative 5 8 over 3. So again, answer version 1, answer version 2, answer version 3, as we're learning to kind of deal with this stuff. (5x squared plus 18x less than 8). In this problem here, our issue is we're solving there's a squared. Remember, that's like an elephant on the boat, which means that this 8 needs to come over. So I would rewrite it as 5x squared plus 18x minus 8 less than 0. Shortcut, I want two numbers that multiply to be negative 40 and add to make 18. I think that's 2 and 20. With a positive 20, negative 2. That and that do make 18x. That times that does make negative 40, so those are my numbers. So we split and group because there's a number attached to that. Again, if there was no number attached, we could just take our quote-unquote shortcut. So now we split. Only thing I can take out of that is x. Only thing I can take out of that after I copy the sign is a 4. I then will bring off my 5x minus 2 and my x plus 4. Don't copy that wrong, otherwise it'll mess me up later. And so now I have to solve it. Adding that, dividing by 5, and moving my 4 to be negative 4. There we go. So those are my two answers. Again, put those numbers on a number line in order. That would be a negative, so it goes here. This would be a positive, so it goes here. And then we want to test some numbers. Off on that side, I'll just pick a number again like a -10. That's a definite negative, smaller than -4. When I go here, 5 times -10 would be -50 minus 2, which obviously would be negative. -10 minus 4 would also be negative. And again, I kept choosing these bad examples, less than 0. You know what? Change these symbols, because you need better examples in your notes. So I'm sorry about that, but again, I probably should have checked those out. But change all those to greater than symbols first. So I'll give you some time to do that. And the reason I'm doing that is because all of our graphs would have looked the same, and then you would not really learn anything. And I remember from being in math class that whenever the examples don't show you anything different, it's hard to go to your homework because you never saw anything but those bad examples. So with that being the symbol, let's move on now. Again, that's going to be negative, that's going to be negative. Is a negative times a negative going to be greater than 0? That is true. And just to prove, it typically alternates, which means this section typically will be the opposite and then the opposite again. So we now will pick a number here. If that's a negative and a positive, obviously there is a 0 somewhere between those. So that'll be 0 minus 2, which is negative, 0 plus 4, which is positive. Would that be greater than 0? No, it would not, because it's going to be negative. And then pick a number bigger than 2/5. Again, I'll just pick a number way away from it, like 5. 5 times 5 is 25 minus 2, which I believe would be positive. 5 plus 4 would be also positive. Positive times positive is greater than 0, which means we are looking at these two sections. So if you were going to graph this, you've got to remember that it does not have a closed circle. It's an open circle, so you would use a parentheses because it's going this way. It has to open the direction that it's going. This here would also be a parentheses shading that way. That would be answer number 1. Number 2, you've got to put this section into interval notation, or sorry, general notation, which is that x is less than -4, or x is greater than, because it's bigger than, 2/5. That would be option answer number 2. And answer option number 3 is interval notation, which from here is easy because notice negative infinity is there. So we're going to go negative infinity up to -4 with a parentheses and combine that with 2/5 going to positive infinity. Again, using parentheses because we do not use a bracket on infinity. So answer option 1, option 2, and option 3. I'm not going to do the next one because it was supposed to be your interval notation, but I've already shown you interval notation, or am I? I think there was a reason why I chose it. Let's just stick with my original plan and hope that the past version of me is smarter than I think he is. Moving this over here, again, because of that elephant on the boat, we need to move it, so it'll be 3x squared minus 20x plus 25 less than 0. It means I'm looking for numbers that multiply to be 75 and add to make -20. 75 divided by 5 is 15. Look at that. We found it already. So again, 5 and 15. Actually, I don't think we need to do this because it's not going to do anything for us. I think the next one is definitely it. Yeah, I think it is. This is going to end up being pretty much the same, so I'm not going to waste your time with that. So no worse. Because this factors, it means you've already seen how to factor. We've already seen what to do with the factors, and we've seen what's going to happen. So I am going to skip this one, and I am going to move to this one. I just need to make sure one of these is similar to what you're going to see on your homework. This is in the wrong form because there's an elephant, so everything must move over, which means when I move my 4x, it should become negative. When I move my 5, it should also become negative, which means in terms of ease, I'm looking for numbers that multiply to be -30 and add to be -4. 30 divided by 2 is not it. 30 divided by 3, that makes 7. 30 divided by 5 doesn't work, which means that you cannot factor this. And the reason you want to know both is because if I found those numbers, I would factor. But this does not factor. And so the reason I wanted this is because if it doesn't factor, that's when you have to now say a equals 6 B is negative 4, C is negative 5, and go through what we learned in our last lesson. Negative negative 4, negative 4 squared, 6, negative 5, 2 times 6, breaking those to your key 3, which is 136. Breaking down 136, because I'm pretty sure it does break down, is 4 times 34, I believe. Yep. But 34 does not have a 4, a 9, or a 25. That's why it helps to do that. So it means that this is 4 plus or minus 2 root 34 over 12, which means I can simplify that even more, which makes it 2 plus root 34 over 12. So how do we deal with this? I'm sorry, plus or minus. How do we deal with this whenever we have such an ugly number? The best way to deal with that is to look at the leave these numbers as it is, but we need a decimal form so we can kind of visualize it. So 2 plus root 34 equals, divided by 12 equals, let's convert that to a decimal. We get about 0.7, and then 2 minus root 12 equals, divided by 12 is, convert that, negative 0.1. So visually what we are looking at is, since that was my minus, it means that 2 minus root 34 over 12 is here. That was my plus, so it means that 2 plus root 34 over 12 is over here. I then have to check some numbers using what I know to be here. That is negative 0.1 about, so I'm going to use a number like negative 5. How do I use negative 5 if it looks like that? Well, what I would do is go back to the old-fashioned way, which is go back to the original problem and plug in negative 5. Again, using analysis here, negative 5 squared would be, 100? No, sorry, 25. 25 times 6 would be 150. Negative 5 times 4 would be negative 20. That would be a negative number, so that would be, is 150 bigger than a negative? The answer to that is yes, so negative 5 works. Between negative 0.7 and negative 0.7 and negative 0.1, notice you went from negative to positive. We should remember from way back earlier in this unit that anytime you go from negative to positive, there is a 0 somewhere in there. So let's check 0. If I plug in 0 there, I get 0 greater than 0 plus 5. Is 0 greater than 5? No, it is not. And then I need something bigger than 0.7, so I'll pick a number like 10. 10 squared, let's go back to your 6x squared. If I plug in 10 squared is 100 times 6, which would be 600. That would be 40 plus 5, and that is also true. So we are again looking at the outside portions. Because your first portion worked, second did not, third portion did. It is again a open circle, so what we're looking at graphically is a parentheses shading this way, and a parentheses shading that way. If we were doing it in our typical form, we are looking at x is less than 2 minus root 34 over 12, or x is greater than 2 plus root 34 over 12. If we were looking at interval notation, we would be going from negative infinity, again using this, negative infinity up to this, united with this, to infinity. Whew. Option 1, option 2, option 3. So your quiz this week is only going to cover this section and the quadratic formula from chapter 4.6. Again, this is not a test to end this week, even though this is our last section. Because we could slow down a little bit, I wanted to make sure you get as many good assessments as possible before we put everything together. On Monday, a pre-test for Chapter 4 will become available as usual, which means you need a 90% on all of your homework to do it. If you can't get to that, I suggest you review for the test on Monday and Tuesday, or use the pre-test for Monday and Tuesday to practice. It's going to close Wednesday at midnight. Your test will open Wednesday morning and close Monday at midnight. So pay attention to your deadlines and make sure to ask if you're unsure. But ask before it becomes urgent. What some of you like to do is wait until Monday at 8 o'clock p.m. and say, hey, is that test due tonight? And I have to say yes. And then you got like 4 hours to do it. Ask me early so that I can clarify it for you if you're unsure, and then that way you have time to do what you need to do. But keep in mind, this test has 8 sections for Wednesday, which is why it's good that you have a whole week to practice and prepare. But it means it has solve by factoring, solve using the quadratic formula, it has completing the square, it has rewrite in vertex form, it has a 5-point chart that we had to do a long time ago. It has every possible thing we've done, which means that you want to try your best to get to the pre-test so you can actually focus on the important questions, because if you don't get to the pre-test, then you are randomly just going to be jumping around working on homework and hoping that it's on the test. If you do your job over the next few days, which hopefully you're starting this on Monday or Tuesday, but if you do your job over the next few days to get all your homework up to 90%, then that means that Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, you could actually spend time looking directly at the test and practicing those questions instead of hoping that you pick the right questions. But other than that, like I said, I can't really force you to do that, and I am always here for assistance. Please let me know if you need it, and good luck. Have a good day.